This week on the Trading Bell, we're talking matters home ownership, and we'll be speaking to the Managing Director of the Kenya Mortgage Refinance Company, Kmrc, Mr. Johnstone Oltetia. We'll be discussing matters dealing with the bond market. Why is it affordable to own a home in Kenya? And a lot much more. But we'll be getting to that shortly. Hello. But first, let's take a look at his profile.
Mr. Johnstone Oltetia is the Chief Executive Officer and Managing Director at the Kenya Mortgage Refinance Company, responsible for the establishment and operationalization of the company. From 2017 to 2019, Mr. Oltetia held the position of Senior Financial Sector Advisor at the National Treasury of Kenya, responsible for policy matters relating to banking, microfinance, capital markets, pensions and insurance, among others. Prior to this, Mr. Oltetia was the Manager Market Supervision at the Capital Markets Authority Kenya, responsible for oversight of listed companies, securities exchanges, central security depositories, asset management companies, investment banks, stockbrokers and investment advisors, among others. He is a certified investment and financial analyst and holder of MBA and BCom degrees, and also a member of the Institute of Certified Investment and Financial Analysts (ICIFA) and Institute of Directors of Kenya. Mr. Oltetia is an alumnus of the Harvard Kennedy School, holding a certificate in innovating public policy and service.
Thank you, Bwana Johnstone Oltetia, for joining us on the Trading Bell. Your preamble to welcome to the show. Of course, a great start to the year. And just to get your opening remarks, many Kenyans have been keenly monitoring the issue around the affordable housing. And you are literally at the center, at the heart of this. Just walk us through, what does Kmrc do and how can Kenyans work more closely with you?
The Kenya Mortgage Refinance Company is financial. It provides long-term funding to the primary mortgage lenders for purposes of lending to wananchi in order to create or make it accessible and affordable to get mortgages. Now, a majority of us, of course, understand Kmrc as a non-deposit taking financial institution. So essentially, it's a wholesale provider of financing. And it does this through the financial institutions. The financial institution we have here are primary mortgage lenders. So, and the primary mortgage lenders are naturally institutions that normally provide mortgages as part of their business offering. And that's why we call them primary mortgage lenders, because they originate the mortgages directly from the wananchi. And now, for that purpose, when they do the origination of what they call the underwriting, they submit a portfolio of mortgages to Kmrc. It's that portfolio that Kmrc refinances. So you see, they do the origination process. They get into contact with the customers directly, and then they pay for those mortgages. And thereafter, they seek money from Kmrc in the form of a refinancing, or what you can call a reimbursement of what they have, and then they use that money to originate new mortgages. Now, the whole purpose is to create affordability, and that's why we are calling it affordable housing. For the longest time in our market, we have mortgages, but when you look at the mortgages that have been there until when Kmrc came in last year, they have been all earmarked for the upper market segment in our country, and therefore a majority of the people cannot access decent housing. And decent housing here means an affordable house that is equally as decent as any other. And that's what Kmrc is pushing. Now, we have some successes already on that, and we're very glad because since Kmrc came to the market, we have provided funding to a number of primary mortgage lenders, to be precise, 10 so far. And extended about 1.3 billion shillings already, which is money which has left Kmrc. And we have a pipeline of another 9 billion that we are working on with the primary mortgage lenders that we are going to push out very shortly. That has helped to reduce the rate at which we are offering mortgages. So essentially, when you look at it carefully, Kmrc is helping to reduce the rate at which customers can access funding, because a loan of 9% has never been available in our market, other than potentially those that are funded by institutions.
All right. Very interesting insights that you share there, Mr. Oltetia. And just to pick it up, majority of Kenyans, of course, also, as they desire to own homes, we do understand that the cost of mortgages has been one of the major barriers. And you've already preempted my next question. Of course, you are in the business of trying to make these loans more affordable. But from where we sit, we're looking at mortgages in the country, not more than 20,000 mortgages. This is according to the latest CBK data. And we're looking at an annual housing demand of over 500,000 units. Are we able to meet this growing appetite for home ownership? And as an organization, I know you're not literally at the stage at which you are building, but you're in the value chain. Perhaps walk us through, how do you intend to raise more funding, especially now that you're seeing the affordable housing pillar is gaining momentum. A number of projects have been launched in Mavoko, we've seen Pangani, we've seen Ngara, and a lot more in the pipeline across different counties. How is Kmrc positioning itself towards tapping into this huge scope of funding that has for many years remained underserved?
Thank you. So when you look at, you're very right. So when you look at the question around the deficit of housing we have in our country, it's actually a very interesting one, because the deficit we have is about 2 million units, according to the last statistics we got of 2019. And that increases by more than 200,000 units every year. Now, we understand that we only have about 50,000 units every year that come to the market. But when you look at those, only about 2% is available for the lower middle income, or the moderate to low income.
Yeah.
That means it's the area that is completely underserved. Now, the upper income is obviously being served for obvious reasons. They can afford, and therefore there's a lot of housing supply on that side. But the most important thing is, how do we enable a majority of the Kenyans who are in the moderate to low income to access homes, and decent homes for that matter? And I think one of the key issues why Kmrc was formed, which is certainly, it's government took part in that, and government deliberately decided that Kmrc should be driven primarily by the private sector. And the idea was to crowd in private sector funding to support affordable housing. Now, the way Kmrc is approaching this, so we have two levels. Number one, we have demand side of housing, and we have the supply side of housing. Now, Kmrc is participating more strongly on the demand side of housing. The demand side of housing is providing funding, or providing long-term funding for that matter. The supply is about development of those units that are needed, that meet the eligibility criteria. So when you look at the demand, you start then looking carefully at how is Kmrc funded to be able then to provide or meet its objectives. And so Kmrc funding is split into two. So we have equity and we have debt financing. So because Kmrc is not a state corporation, it is funded mainly through shareholder funds, which is the equity we are talking about, and loans, which is the debt that we are also talking about. Now, so equity certainly is money we raised. I think you already know that. We have about 23 shareholders. Government is one of them, and the difference 22 private sector, including the IFC, Shelter, and strong banks like KCB, Coop Bank, and HF, and the rest. Now, and then we have debt. So the kind of debt financing we have currently, which is also split into two, we have debt financing through the National Treasury, which is sovereign debt. So that sovereign debt is what we are accessing currently from the World Bank and the African Development Bank. And that money is very concessional. So it's extended to Kmrc for purposes of refinancing those to create that affordability. Now, so that's the money we've been pushing through, and that's about 30 billion shillings, 20 billion in terms of the line of credit from the World Bank, and another 10 billion from the African Development Bank.
Yes.
Now, so you see that is, that's how Kmrc started.
Yeah.
But for purposes of sustainability of Kmrc, we had to look for additional financing to blend these resources that we have. And the way we are doing this is accessing capital markets funding, and that is by issuing of bonds. So as a corporate bond issuer, Kmrc is currently in the market to issue a bond. For the time being, it's a plain vanilla bond. And that is part of the resources that we're going to use to refinance the mortgages. Now, so the way we do this is that we access the more expensive capital markets funding. But the reason why we are doing that is because, concessional resources will run out at some stage, but you need a sustainable institution over time. And the way that we want to sustain that, fundraising part of Kmrc is to create a track record in the capital markets. And then it will be a regular issuer, we're attracting investors to come in and put in resources, and therefore we use that to refinance over time. But before we exhaust the concessional resources, we are going to blend the capital markets resources we're accessing with the concessional resources we have, and that reduces the rate at which we are going to lend, because of course capital markets funding is more expensive. We have the concessional resources, and the weighted average cost of funds when you blend the two will be lower. And that's part of Kmrc creating that affordability over time. So, going into the bond is right in the market now, and we expect it to close before 20th of February. And that means we want to raise that money as quickly as possible so that we can extend to the mortgage. Now, we essentially align the resources that we raise with a pipeline of mortgages that we get from the financial institutions. So we already have a pipeline of the mortgages that we're going to refinance, and therefore when we raise funding, we know that, or we have very clear visibility of where the money will go. Immediately we raise it.
All right.
So the funding of that, so you can see the funding of Kmrc is equity, debt, and the debt is split into capital markets debt and concessional financing.